Part 1. Shadows over the Santa Lucia Range. The sun was setting behind the Santa Lucia Range, leaving a blazing red streak on the horizon. The winding trail snaked through chaparral bushes deep into the mountains, an area locals often avoided once night fell. The wind howled through the branches like whispers of long-forgotten ancient tales. Miss Marple, an elderly Englishwoman, small in stature but sharp-eyed, stood at the edge of a cliff, holding a leather notebook and a fountain pen. No one would think that a woman who looked like she was born to enjoy tea and tend roses would travel all the way to the west coast of America just to follow a vague legend. But Miss Marple was no ordinary lady. She had solved some of Europe's most baffling cases, not with guns, but with observation, deduction, and an almost supernatural intuition. Please subscribe to the channel to hear the true mysterious story in California, a place of the world's most mysterious wonders. Don't forget to like and comment below the video if you find the channel interesting and captivating. This time, she was following a strange letter from a cousin settled in California. Inside, only 2 lines. Aunt Marple, I have seen them. The motionless dark figures on the mountaintop. They watch me every evening. Signed, Edward. No address, no trace. And the most terrifying fact, Edward disappeared 3 days after sending that letter. Miss Marple had heard about the Dark Watchers, strange beings always appearing at dusk on the Santa Lucia Range. People said they never attacked, never moved. They only watched. As the sunset faded and darkness descended, Miss Marple looked up from her notes, and then, on the distant hilltop, she saw a shape. Tall, thin, motionless, wearing a long cloak and a wide-brimmed hat. Her heart tightened. Her experienced eyes, which had witnessed countless horrific scenes, still trembled. But instead of panic, she recorded every detail, then whispered, "All right, who are you?" The figure did not answer, but the wind, it seemed to carry a whisper. Part 2. The Mountain Guardian and the Ancient Curse. Miss Marple sat down on a cold rock, carefully noting the details of the figure she had just seen. About 1.9 meters tall, standing upright, not moving, a feeling of observing, but no footsteps, no light reflection, as if unreal. A small noise sounded in the nearby bushes. Miss Marple quickly closed her notebook and reached into her jacket pocket, not for a weapon, but for a small flashlight. The soft yellow beam swept through the shrubs. Then, a hoarse voice rose from the darkness. "You shouldn't be here at this hour, ma'am." An elderly man stepped out, thin, with wild white hair. He wore a worn wool coat with dirt-stained cuffs, eyes cloudy but still sharp. "Excuse me," Miss Marple spoke calmly as usual. "I'm investigating the disappearance of my nephew, Edward Marlowe. Have you seen him recently?" The man remained silent for a long moment, then slowly said, "Edward. The boy who climbs the mountain every evening. Says he wants to meet them. The last time I saw him was 3 nights ago, right where you are standing." Miss Marple leaned forward. "Who are you, sir?" "They call me Old Theo. I used to be the forest ranger here. Now, I guard other things. Theo, do you believe those creatures are real?" "Believe?" Old Theo smirked, eyes heavy with years. "I have lived with them for over 30 years. The Dark Watchers are not human, but they are not demons either. They are the mountain's memories, cursed ones who dared to look too deep into the darkness." Miss Marple took careful notes. "Has anyone ever survived getting too close to them?" No one returns with their mind intact. Either they disappear or they become part of that silence. A strong wind blew through the mountain slope, rustling the trees like the forest's breath. Old Theo squinted toward the summit where the figure had appeared. To find Edward, you must enter the tall pine forest. There is an ancient stone path. No map marks it. But if you truly want to find it, it will appear. Miss Marple nodded slightly. And if I encounter them again? Old Theo whispered his warning. Don't look into their eyes. Never look. Part 3. The path that does not appear on maps. The next morning, a thin mist covered the air like a cold silk scarf. Miss Marple left the old inn at the foot of Lucia Mountain with a light backpack. Notebook, compass, flashlight, a small knife, and most importantly, the short letter from Edward. Old Theo was no longer at his place. He left behind a flat stone, carved with a knife into the shape of an arrow pointing north, toward the tall pine forest. Miss Marple walked in that direction. No map guided her, but every step seemed drawn into a hidden trail, appearing between the straight tree trunks like cathedral columns. No bird song, no insect sounds. Only her footsteps on the dry leaves, echoing like a ticking clock in a cramped room. 1 hour passed. 2 hours. She began to feel as if she was being watched. On an old bare tree stump, she found something strange. An ancient pendant, a sun-shaped charm broken in two. On the back was engraved, "For E.M., the one who dared to look straight at the truth." Her heart clenched. It was Edward's. She had given him that pendant when he was a 12-year-old boy, fascinated by ancient puzzles. She bent down and examined it closely with a magnifying glass. The ground around bore footprints, but unclear, as if someone walked without leaving weight, or not belonging to this world's gravity. Miss Marple kept walking until the sun began to cast long shadows. Just as old Theo said, a narrow trail suddenly appeared, lined with stones, covered in moss, leading deep into the forest. That path was on no map, and then she heard singing. Far away, faint, a long haunting melody, like an ancient lullaby of a lonely soul. Wordless, yet full of haunting sorrow, Miss Marple quickened her pace, eyes sharp, gripping her flashlight tightly. At the end of the path, she saw a stone house. Old, green moss covered the roof. The door was unlocked, the windows dusted and blurred. She pushed the door open. Inside, it was colder than outside, and in the center of the room hung a life-sized mural. Miss Marple held her breath. The painting depicted a group of tall figures in black cloaks standing in the forest, and before them was Edward. But the strangest thing, Edward in the painting was staring straight out, as if looking directly at Miss Marple herself. Part 4. The Chosen Ones in the Darkness. Miss Marple stood frozen before the mural. Edward, in the painting, still wore the same face, bright eyes, brows furrowed as if resisting something unseen. But what sent a chill down her spine wasn't his image, but the feeling. The painting was alive, not a poetic figure of speech. Truly, the light within the painting seemed to shift depending on the angle of view. The shadows behind Edward appeared to move, though the brush strokes were clearly still. Miss Marple stepped closer, gently touching the corner of the frame. A narrow slit opened on the side of the wall, just big enough to hold an old leather-bound notebook. She opened it. The first page was written in Latin, Libri Vigilium Obscurorum, the Book of the Dark Watchers. Inside were scrawled notes, drawings, symbols, hand-drawn maps, and diary entries in different handwriting, apparently added over many generations. One passage held her gaze for a long moment. When humans first feared the dark, they created fire. When they feared themselves, they created darkness with form. We call them watchers. They are not monsters. They are memories erased from human minds, but not gone, transformed into shape. And once you see them, they will see you. She turned to the next page. The handwriting abruptly stopped. Ink was smudged as if the writer had been snatched away mid-sentence. Just then her flashlight flickered once, then went out. No more light, no sound, only the soft whistle of the wind, but this time it carried a whisper, a male voice, very close, as if right behind her neck. "Marple!" She spun around quickly, but saw no one. The room was empty except for the painting. Now Edward in the mural had vanished. Miss Marple's heart pounded fiercely. She stepped back, gripping her knife tightly. At that moment, through the dusty window, the dim twilight light shone in, and in that instant, she clearly saw the silhouette of a dark watcher standing silently on the distant hill, exactly like the painting. The position, exactly the same. She understood. This was no longer a fairy tale, nor a hallucination. These beings were real, and they were choosing. Choosing whom? Choosing those who dared to look at them. Part 5. The Pact of Ayrshire. Miss Marple slammed the leather-bound notebook shut, her hand trembling slightly. Outside, darkness was creeping in, but she could not return to town at this hour. Edward's disappearance from the painting was not just a hallucination. It was a sign, a warning. She lit an oil lamp found in the stone house. The flickering flame illuminated the old walls. Behind a rotting bookshelf, she discovered a wall crevice that showed signs of being opened many times. Inside was an ancient map, hand-drawn with faded brown ink, but the rough shape of the Santa Lucia region was still visible. A red mark lay deep in the forest, with a single line written beneath, "The place where memories are imprisoned." Miss Marple rolled up the map and stuffed it into her coat pocket. She knew. This place might be the heart of the entire mystery. Night fell. She could not leave the old house in complete darkness. So she locked the door, placed a chair against it, and rested her back in the corner of the room. But sleep did not come. Instead, she had a strange dream. In the dream, she stood inside an ancient stone circle, like the Druid stone circles in England, but larger, grayer, radiating a strange energy. On each stone was a painting of a person, blindfolded, mouth sewn shut, hands placed on their chest. A voice echoed, source unknown, as if inside her mind. "You have seen them. You must remember." She turned and saw Edward standing there, gaunt, eyes sunken but still shining. He said, "Aunt Marple, I found out they don't just watch. They collect." "Collect what?" "Memories. Things people want to forget. Mistakes hidden. Sins left in the forest. They consume them. And whoever sees them becomes a bearer of those memories. And you?" Edward lowered his head. "I looked too long. Now, they imprison me as part of the pact." Miss Marple screamed, "I will get you out of here." Edward shook his head, eyes watering. "The pact cannot be broken. Unless—" Whispers rose again, now from hundreds, thousands of different voices. "You become the new watcher." Miss Marple woke with a start, drenched in cold sweat, the oil lamp long extinguished. Outside the window, the sky was dark gray, and on the hillside, the shadow of the dark watcher still stood, motionless, silent, as if never having left. She gripped the book and the map tightly and whispered, All right, if you live on memories, I will find a way to take them back. Part 6. The Stone Circle and the Final Trial. Before dawn, Miss Marple left the old stone house. The ancient map guided her along the hillside, passing towering pine trees that seemed to block out the sky. The air was thick with dampness and eerie silence, as if the forest itself was holding its breath, watching her. After 3 hours, she arrived at a clearing shaped like a circle. In the center stood large standing stones arranged in an arc, the very place from her dream. She stepped inside the circle, feeling the atmosphere shift around her. It was as if the outside world had suddenly receded, and then they appeared, the Dark Watchers, tall figures cloaked in black robes, heads covered, no faces, no sound, but they didn't need words. She felt their voices echo directly in her mind. You have brought the memories. You have seen. You have come. A shadow taller than the others stepped forward, revealing hands beneath the cloak. Human hands, but dry and gnarled like rotting wood. He placed on the ground a broken axe-shaped stone. Inside it was the face of Edward, motionless like a statue. But his eyes were open, staring straight at Miss Marple, pleading, "Exchange memories. Trade your soul. One choice, one silence." Miss Marple understood immediately. She could take Edward back by replacing him in the pact, becoming the new Watcher, losing her memory, losing herself, wandering the woods forever, collecting the memories abandoned by humans. She looked at Edward, his face soaked with fear, but with a slight shake of his head, begging her not to sacrifice herself. She pulled out the Book of the Dark Watchers from her coat and opened to the last page, where the letters began to glow strangely. A passage appeared, as if written just for her. Only when one understands that memory is not merely the past, but the root of oneself, will the darkness give way. Miss Marple closed her eyes. She did not choose death, nor did she choose to sacrifice her memories. She chose to remember everything, every youthful mistake, the unjust death of her father, the family secrets she had tried to forget, even the things she had denied to live a peaceful life. Memories surged, painful, burning, but also true. She opened her eyes. The stone circle shone brightly. The Dark Watchers stepped back. For the first time since appearing, they trembled. A voice spoke one last time. "You have chosen truth. You no longer belong to us." The sky split with a ray of light. Edward collapsed at her feet, alive, breathing, and real. Miss Marple embraced him. The shadows faded like morning mist. The stone circle cracked, and the forest began to echo with birdsong once more. The next day, Miss Marple and Edward left Santa Lucia, carrying the ancient map, the book, and memories that no one else remembered. But before departing, she carved a small inscription on the stone near the forest gate. The true Watcher does not look into the darkness, but through it. Part 7. Epilogue. The letter to the next keeper. Santa Lucia faded slowly behind the train window. Miss Marple sat facing Edward, her nephew, whom she thought she had lost forever. He had grown thinner, quieter, and his eyes no longer looked like those of an ordinary man. Not because of fear, but because he had seen. Both of them had seen the ones who stood in the shadows and survived. But leaving that place, Miss Marple knew what had happened could not be kept to herself. This story had to be passed on, but not for the public, not for the press or television. It was meant only for the next one, the one who someday would step back into the forest and be chosen by the Watchers again. In a small boarding room in Monterey, she sat at a wooden desk, taking out a pen and old parchment paper. The Book of the Dark Watchers had been carefully wrapped in black cloth and locked in a wooden chest beside her. She began to write. Want to say. To whoever reads these lines, if you hold this book, it means you have seen them, perhaps only from afar, perhaps only a fleeting shadow through the treetops. But believe me, they are real. I am Miss Marple, someone who once believed logic and truth could explain everything. But no, there are parts of this world that exist beyond the edge of scientific reasoning. The Dark Watchers do not kill. They are not demons. They are memories, the parts forgotten, denied, buried. When we turn our backs on our pain, when we refuse to face the truth, they grow, they watch, but they also guard the memories that humans are too weak to hold. And one day, when you are brave enough or desperate enough, you will stand within the stone circle, and they will offer you a choice. Remember, there is no escape. There is only one thing that keeps you human: choosing to remember everything, even what you do not want to remember. If you can do that, you will not become a watcher. You will become the knower. And if you survive, leave a message, as I have done. Do not let the darkness be the only one to tell the story. Miss Marple. Miss Marple folded the letter, placed it on top of the book inside the chest. She locked it, sealing it with a beeswax stamp bearing a chrysanthemum, the flower she had loved since childhood. The next morning, she left the chest to the old library in San Jose, under the sender's name, Lucia M., a name no one could trace. And she left, leaving no trace. 3 years later, in the dusty archives of the library, a folklore student named Aryan Nguyen discovered the chest. Curious, she opened it and read the first letter. The next day, she was seen standing alone at the foot of Santa Lucia Mountain, gazing up at the pine forest, with eyes like she was hypnotized. Behind her, on the highest hillside, a dark figure stood silent, motionless, quietly waiting.